Democracy around the world appears to be in retreat, but not, it turns out, in Taiwan. The pro-sovereignty Democratic Progressive Party's candidate, William Lai, won the recent presidential election. So how will that affect the island's relations with its giant neighbour, China? And how should Europe respond? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. William Lai took the DPP to an unprecedented third term in office. But what are the global implications in an already tense part of the world?
Scenes of celebration, but undertones of trepidation.
We have not engaged in any provocation. Taiwan simply wants to maintain its democratic and free way of life.
Western countries welcomed Taiwan's shared commitment to democracy, that it once again showed how firmly democracy is rooted in Taiwan, and congratulated Taiwanese people for demonstrating the strength of their robust democratic system and electoral process. These messages angered Beijing, which regards Taiwan as a renegade province.
Taiwan has never been a country, not in the past and certainly not in the future. Taiwan independence has never been possible. It has not been possible in the past and will never be possible in the future.
Modern Taiwan was formed after the end of the Chinese Civil War in 1949. That's when Chiang Kai-shek and his troops retreated there after losing to communist forces. Beijing has since promised to reunite Taiwan with the mainland by force if it formally declares independence. And China is expected to give action to words following the latest election, possibly with military exercises.
According to the research and judgment of the Defense Ministry, the People's Liberation Army will continue to strengthen its pressure towards Taiwan in the near future through regular combat readiness patrols and other activities.
But China taking the island by force would have significant consequences, possibly triggering a global recession. Bloomberg Economics puts the price tag of such a conflict at around $10 trillion, equal to about 10% of global GDP. That's because the majority of all microchips that power our computers, cars, smartphones are produced in Taiwan. When it comes to high-end chips, around 90% depend on Taiwan for at least part of their manufacture. For now, it's hoped the economic implications are enough to deter China from attacking. All sides are hoping to continue with the status quo, but all eyes are on Beijing.
Let's meet our guests. In Taipei is Tingting Liu, a chief foreign affairs and military correspondent at TVBS News. In Hong Kong is Andrew Leung, an independent China strategist. And joining me here in the studio is Norman Baker, a former British politician with the Liberal Democrat Party. Norman travelled to China and Hong Kong during his time as a transport minister. Tingting, I'll come to you first of all. Just tell me the aftermath of the election. How is everyone feeling in Taiwan right now?
I think because Taiwan is a democracy, so I think everyone's accepting the results. Even though we actually did see the ruling party, the Democratic Progressive Party, the DPP, successfully securing a third term under the current new president-elect Lai or some call him by him William Lai. But I think it's important to note that he actually won the election very beautifully for the presidential portion. But for parliament-wise, he actually didn't get a really strong mandate from the people. But no doubt it is still a result, much, I would say, way better than what was expected in that case, But I think, moving on forward from right now on Taiwan's democracy, people will actually see how the new government will perform until the next election.
Andrew, China has described William Lai as a troublemaker. They see him as someone who is obviously a separatist. What's your reading of William Lai, the politician, and now the leader of Taiwan?
Well, Beijing has always viewed the Democratic People's Party as a separatist party with separatist tendencies, because that party has never accepted the so-called 1992 consensus, reached decades ago, on how to define the one China policy. because according to the DPP, Taiwan has got its distinct political system and its distinct identity. And that is also according to recent polls conducted by the Washington-based Wilson Center. It found that only the vast majority of the Taiwan people want to preserve the status quo, whereas only 6% want unification, or 6% want immediate independence. So that suggests that most of the Taiwan people cherish their political system, their culture, their identity. But that cannot be allowed to forever, because according to President Xi, the unification of Taiwan is part of the China dream. But Beijing has issued serially 3 white papers on Taiwan, all confirming the preference for peaceful unification. But even peaceful unification, on what terms, that has not been clearly defined, even though Beijing has promised the one country, two system principle of Hong Kong. But of course, after what has happened to Hong Kong, that has got no traction now with the Taiwan people. So I think that there is a conundrum there. And of course, Beijing has never ruled out the possibility of non-peaceful means, but the preference is still on peaceful unification. And Beijing is now promoting people-to-people exchanges, because there is over 1 million Taiwanese, 1 million or even 2 million Taiwanese people living and working on the mainland on their businesses. And then there is a great deal of people-to-people exchange in terms of visits, millions of people of tourists visiting.
But Andrew, you mentioned the China dream, as you call it. I mean, Taiwan is the world's 6th most free country, universal healthcare, a thriving democracy, as we've just seen with those elections, affordable public transport, a peaceful transition of power. Why would the Taiwanese want anything to do with China?
This is what I said. I mean, according to the polls, a very tiny the percentage want unification. Most of them, the Taiwanese people, want to preserve the status quo, their way of life, their political system. But then, of course, Beijing's plan is to have a kind of one country, 2 systems formula. But as I was saying, the Hong Kong formula has got no traction now after what has happened over the years. But I think that Beijing has already said in the past that everything is negotiable except the one China principle. So it remains for Beijing to show to the Taiwanese people what is on the table for the peaceful unification. And that is a conundrum, because that's never been clearly spelled out, other than the general principle of one country, 2 systems, which I said, I mean, it's lost its traction.
Andrew, thank you. Norman, a lot of people watching in Western countries will be looking at this Taiwanese elections. Why should we be interested, particularly in Europe? Just spell out the influence China has and what this all means for the European relations.
Well, let me first, if I may, just congratulate Taiwan on a very successful election. And I think it's a beacon of democracy across the world, and a lesson for many of us in the Western world that democracy can work. And the democracy in Taiwan has produced a very successful country, economically, socially and environmentally, and that's a lesson to us all. Secondly, I have to say that, why should Taiwan, who's never been ruled by the Communist Party, never been in charge of it, why should they have to put up with Beijing saying they want to annex them? We've seen Beijing betray Hong Kong. As we heard, actually, the 2 systems no longer work. They've been taken over. We saw Beijing invade an independent country, Tibet, and annex that. We've seen them set up concentration camps in Xinjiang. I wouldn't want anything to do with Beijing. But in terms of the international perspective, which you ask about, well, I mean, China is a terribly important country. It's going to be one of the 2 superpowers. It's more important now than Russia. And therefore, you can't ignore China on the world stage. And in fact, how China behaves, for example, on climate change is terribly important in terms of the whole world. So, of course, we must engage with China. But, the danger with Taiwan is if Xi Jinping, in his arrogant way, decides he wants to take over Taiwan, which he might do at some point when he thinks militarily he can get away with it, then that could potentially cause World War III, because the Americans are committed to the defense of Taiwan. The status quo kind of holds at the moment, and I think the people in Taiwan probably, Tingting can tell us if we're wrong, but the people in Taiwan probably think that the status quo is a stable situation that doesn't involve causing problems at either end, either independence or in terms of Beijing taking over, and therefore that should continue. And in a sense, it does work. But if someone tries to upset that status quo, then of course we don't know what will happen. We do know that China is building up its military strength. We know it's being very aggressive to neighbours in the South China Sea, for example. And I would just say to Beijing, they ought to back off.
So this really is something that we should all be interested in, and we should all be paying attention to.
Well, of course we have, because, I mean, look at what's happened in Russia and Ukraine. Look what's happening with Israel and Gaza. These so-called local events have international repercussions which affect the economy, they affect the military balance, they affect the environment.
Tingting, I want to ask you about any Chinese influence that you may have observed in the election. I mean, was there any attempt at misinformation, disinformation?
I mean, no doubt in every single Taiwan election, there has been some sort of misinformation or disinformation campaigns that is not only happening locally, but also there are also foreign influence. I mean, we actually did see that the DPP, the ruling party, putting out examples of how such political influence that they are from external forces, be it online disinformation, trying to make a particular candidate look ugly, there are actually multiple examples. And even there was like how the Taiwanese National Security Council actually spoke to foreign journalists to say that, there might be some attempt, in trying to force a really popular band in Taiwan, goes by name Mayday, which is they're quite popular as the English band Coldplay, so it is of that sort of level, kind of forcing this popular bands to make a stance whether they actually still abide by the One China policy. So in that sense, I mean there's a lot of this kind of disinformation, misinformation campaign that we've seen all just before the elections in attempts to influence the results. But I think one thing that was really brought up very important by the previous two speakers is that the Taiwanese voters actually made a very clear voice through this democratic election. One is that they still believe that the ruling party, the DPP, it's probably the most effective party we have right now to actually rule Taiwan. But it doesn't mean that most people agree with them, because look, I mean, William actually only won. William Lai himself only won the election by 40%, so he didn't have a strong mandate. And the most important thing is that the parliament actually is the first time where all three parties, none of them actually got a majority vote. So actually, I would say that this actually shows that the people in Taiwan would actually really want to keep the status quo and would really hope for peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. So this is what actually was accurately pointed out earlier. But I think it's also very important for Beijing to understand that when we mean by the status quo, it is really just to preserve our current way of living, our current democratic system. And I think one thing is very interesting when the other speaker brought out the 92 consensus. Like currently Beijing actually says that for both sides to talk, the Taiwanese government needs to acknowledge and accept the 92 consensus, which effectively means One China. But
and just on that point, Tingting, just on that point about one country, two systems. If you speak to the average Taiwanese citizen, how do they feel about that?
No, none of the Taiwanese people or these majority people on the ground will actually accept one country, two system. I mean, look at President Tsai Ing-wen, the current president, newer address and her question and answer during her press conference with the media, I was actually the one who actually asked her what is her thoughts about the 92 consensus and all. And one thing that President Tsai brought up, which was very interesting, is that for the past 7 years, she has actually only acknowledged that the 92 consensus is a historical event and basically meaning that it did happen, but there was in no way that she acknowledged that this is something that in which the Chinese would actually say that you need to accept 92 consensus before we can negotiate and talk, But for the Taiwanese government, they actually say that, if you want to talk, the Beijing government should treat Taiwan with equal dignity and parity, But I think what she said at the press conference was very interesting. She said that 92 consensus is actually a risk because after 92 consensus, it means that the Chinese is going to force the one China principle and eventually the one country, two system. So what is happening here right now is actually President Tsai actually lifted the barriers for the incoming president-elect William Lai. Basically means that William Lai will not need to answer to the 92 consensus question because currently William Lai's foreign policy or cross-strait policy is he actually would say that he is going to follow Taiwan's policy. And not forgetting that the vice president-elect Bi Khim-seow, she was actually the former U.S. Taiwanese representative to the United States, So she has actually very clear lines about where the Americans actually see how Taiwan should position ourselves, We actually see that what Biden, after when Taiwan election results were released, that's the first thing Biden says, that we do not support independence. And right now, actually, what is the DPP's current stance is that they also acknowledge that the majority of people in Taiwan actually want to keep the status quo. So, how the DPP is trying to position themselves to say that they think that currently Taiwan is actually already a sovereign independent country, which goes by the name Republic of China. And also, through navigating this way, still keeping to the constitution framework and order, it means that I would say that William Lai is going to be watched very closely by both U.S. government and also by Beijing.
Thanks, Tingting. You mentioned Lai just there. I want to bring Andrew in. Andrew, give me your reading of William Lai. What kind of a president do you think he'll be?
Well, obviously, he's a very polished politician. But on the other hand, there is no doubt that he has pro-independence tendencies. And that is in accord with the, again, recent findings. Certain polls conducted in Taiwan suggest that the percentage of Taiwan people wanting independence, even though it's not nearly half, has been rising. And as I said, I mean, that of course with the Taiwan people cherishing their way of life and their political system. But I think that there are certain mis-narratives in this discourse. First of all, about the kind of ongoing demonization of China. I mean, China is a threat, is viewed by the Western media in all sectors. I mean, all this nonsense about Xinjiang is ridiculous. And at the moment, Xinjiang is now a tourism hotspot. And more people visiting Xinjiang will see through this Western narrative of the so-called genocide. And as far as Hong Kong is concerned, in spite of the imposition of the national security law, Hong Kong still remains a vibrant society and vibrant economy. But then, of course, nothing is in black and white. And then the sentiments of the Taiwan people have got to be taken into account. And Beijing is still on reaffirming its the China dream, including the unification, peaceful unification. Again, as I stress, I mean, peaceful unification has been stressed 3 times in 3 white papers because there is no point waging a war on Taiwan because that would mean the Chinese people fighting Chinese people.
Andrew, I think Norman has something to say on this. I think Norman might disagree. What do you say, Norman?
I think the China dream's a China nightmare, to be honest with you. And if you look at the response that there's been in Xinjiang, in Tibet, in Hong Kong, and indeed to some extent in Taiwan as well, the Chinese government is not winning hearts and minds. Whatever they've managed to secure in the last 50, 60, 70 years has been through force. Nobody has voluntarily said, we want to be part of the so-called motherland. They don't do it. If they've succumbed to force. And I think the Taiwan people will only ever be part of mainland China if they are forced to do so.
Andrew, what do you say to that?
I think that the wish for unification, of course, is nationwide on the mainland. I mean, if you conduct a poll now on the mainland, all the Chinese people, I would guarantee you that over 99% would support unification.
But Andrew, it's not their business. It's not their business. You got to understand that the Taiwanese people.
I know. But what I'm saying is that the Taiwanese people, as I said before, do not want unification. And herein lies the conundrum. I think it's incumbent upon the Beijing government to explain to the Taiwan people what sort of a system they're offering to Taiwan, and merely using the so-called one China, one country, two systems principle is not going to convince the Taiwan people.
Let's bring Tingting back in.
All Tingting of the flag. I think that there's a lot of other things.
Thanks, Andrew. I want to ask Tingting in Taiwan. Tingting, the China dream, is it a nightmare for most people in Taiwan? The China dream, is it a nightmare?
I think one thing is which actually the speakers point out accurately is that really that Taiwanese want to keep the status quo. There are still, I think, as a military correspondent, I can tell you that before elections, there has actually been Chinese weather balloons, coming into our airspace, through this gray zone tactics, and currently even to many days after the election, there has been continued daily military plane and warships incursions around Taiwan. I mean, they haven't crossed the 24 nautical miles contiguous zone, but with this jets practicing around Taiwan, it means that the Taiwanese Air Force will need to scramble basically every day, just around the region. I mean, this is how tensions are happening right now around Taiwan. And on top of that, we are also talking about how China has actually been really sometimes out of the blue canceling agricultural trade deals, in a way just to punish local farmers or local fisheries, on Taiwan, because actually trade and between across trade is really quite robust in that sense.
Thanks, Tingting. I want to bring Norman back in. Norman, I thought it was really interesting in Europe, all the countries who put out congratulatory messages, they didn't mention William Lai by name, and they just congratulated the winners of the election and those who voted. I mean, this is quite a sensitive issue in Europe.
Yes, and those who congratulated the victors were then told off by the Beijing government to say it's none of their business, which is completely wrong. So the Chinese government always reacts in this way. They see anything to do with Taiwan or Hong Kong or Tibet as a so-called internal affair. And actually, it isn't in that sense. I mean, Taiwan has been studiously running its own affairs for decades, and jolly well good luck to them as well for doing so. So, China is hugely sensitive, but as I come back to the main point, if China really wants to reunify with Taiwan, it has to persuade Taiwanese people that it's a fair partner and it's got something to offer which is attractive to them. Because, with all the best will in the world, making promises which then have got nothing behind them doesn't count for anything. We were promised on Hong Kong. There was a deal with the British for 50 years on Hong Kong. Well, that's gone down the pan, hasn't it? And one country, two systems have gone down the pan in Hong Kong. So their promises aren't worth the paper they're written on.
Do you worry that the Chinese have looked at Russia and Ukraine? They've seen Putin do whatever he wants in Ukraine, and nobody's pretty much tried to stop him externally, apart from helping the Ukrainians. Do you worry that the Chinese will feel emboldened by that?
I think the Chinese government, let me be quite clear, the Chinese people and Chinese government in Beijing are two different things. And the Chinese people, of course, haven't got a free press, so I'm not surprised 99% of them want Taiwan, because they haven't got a free press to tell them any alternative views. But I mean, the Chinese government, Xi Jinping is behaving much more dictatorially, even with his own people, than was the case with previous Chinese leaders, Deng Xiaoping and so on. That's not what I think is appropriate, and I think they are taking lessons from Russia and Putin. Well, it's very important, in my view, for the West and other countries to resist what Putin is doing, because if Putin wins in Ukraine, then it's a green light to other people to behave the same way across the world.
Andrew, final question to you. What do you think will happen? Give us a prediction 5 years from now. Taiwan by itself, independent and sovereign, or subsumed into one China?
I don't think that the Taiwan people or the Taiwan politicians, either party, would dare to declare de jure independence, because according to their rhetoric, I mean, Taiwan is already in every way a self-sovereign kind of political entity. But as far as the United States is concerned, neither would the United States support independence, because this would rattle the stability on the Taiwan Strait. But as far as Beijing is concerned, Beijing, I don't think that is thinking of resorting to invasion anytime soon.
Andrew, Tingting and Norman, thank you all so much for your time. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable TRT World. But from now, from me and Brady and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.